Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Whether you have returned tonight or are discovering this channel for the first time, this is a quiet place to slow down, learn something gentle, and allow the day to gradually fade. Tonight, we are following one of the most familiar animals ever connected with sleep. A white sheep approaches a low fence. It lifts its front legs, passes over the wooden rail, and lands softly on the other side. Then another sheep follows, and another. For generations, people have pictured this slow procession while lying awake in bed. The scene feels simple, almost as though sheep have always belonged beside pillows, blankets, and the soft edge of sleep. But the animal crossing that imaginary fence is the result of a transformation lasting thousands of years. A domestic sheep belongs to the species Ovis aries. It is a hoofed, plant-eating mammal that chews cud, lives naturally in social groups, and has been raised by humans for meat, milk, hides, and wool. Adult sheep vary greatly in size. A small ewe may weigh around 35 kilograms, while a large ram from a heavy breed can approach 180 kilograms. Some sheep have tightly curled horns. Others are naturally hornless. Their coats may be white, black, brown, grey, spotted, coarse, silky, tightly curled, or almost entirely hair rather than wool. The round white sheep commonly shown in bedtime pictures is only one version of a much larger and more varied animal. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe, and if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find this calm corner of science, one sleepy listener at a time. The thick fleece covering many modern sheep also hides an important part of their history. Wild sheep do not usually grow the large, even coats seen on specialized wool breeds. Their covering is closer to that of many other mountain mammals. Longer, coarser hairs form an outer layer that helps protect the body from wind, rain, dirt, and rubbing against rock. Beneath those hairs sits a finer undercoat that traps air near the skin during cold weather. As the seasons change, part of that coat naturally loosens and falls away. Early domestic sheep probably looked much more like these wild animals than like the sheep shown on modern wool labels. Their coats contained more coarse hair. Their finer fibers were shorter and less uniform. Many of them could shed much of the coat without being clipped. The dense fleece familiar today appeared gradually because people kept choosing which sheep would produce the next generation. An animal with slightly more fine undercoat could provide more useful fiber. A sheep with pale wool produced material that was easier to dye. A coat that remained attached until people collected it was less likely to be lost across rocks, shrubs, and pasture. When those traits were selected again and again, generation after generation, the sheep began to change. People did not create wool from nothing. They took a natural insulating layer and slowly made it denser, longer, finer, and less likely to fall out by itself. In some modern breeds, that process has gone so far that the fleece must be removed by humans each year. Without shearing, it can continue collecting dirt, moisture, seeds, and heat around the animal's body. This creates a strange partnership. The sheep grows a coat that humans value. and humans take responsibility for removing that coat safely. The fiber can then be washed, sorted, twisted into yarn, and made into clothing, carpets, mattresses, insulation, and blankets. Its warmth comes partly from tiny curls called crimp. Those bends stop the fibers from lying completely flat, leaving small pockets where still air can collect. That trapped air slows the loss of body heat. Wool can also absorb water vapor inside the fiber, while its outer surface remains comparatively resistant to liquid water. These properties helped carry sheep from ancient pastures into bedrooms around the world. Yet wool is only one part of the journey. Long before sheep became symbols of softness, their ancestors lived on exposed ground where sharp vision, sure footing, and flock behaviour could mean the difference between safety and danger. Before people counted sheep, people hunted them. Before people wove their coats into blankets, those coats rose and fell with the seasons. And before the sheep became a quiet animal beside the bed, it was a wary creature shaped by mountains, weather, and predators. To understand how that animal became the one we know tonight, the fleece first has to be lifted away, revealing the body beneath it. The sheep stands for a moment after crossing the fence. Its wool hides most of the body, but the shape underneath is compact, strong, and built for steady movement. A long muzzle reaches forward from the face. The eyes sit toward the sides of the skull, giving the animal a wide view of the ground around it. Below the fleece, the legs end in split hooves that can adjust to uneven surfaces. Strong jaw muscles work through mouthfuls of grass, while a large digestive system prepares those plants for slow fermentation. This is the body of a grazing animal. Adult females are called ewes. Adult males are rams. Young sheep are lambs. All domestic sheep belong to the species Ovis aries. They are members of a much larger animal family called Bovidae. This family includes goats, cattle, bison, buffalo, and many kinds of antelope. Bovids share several features, including a stomach adapted to plant food, and, in many species, permanent horns. A sheep's horn grows from a living bony core attached to the skull. Around that core sits a hard outer covering made from keratin. Keratin is the same tough protein found in wool, hair, fingernails, and hooves. The horn continues growing through the animal's life. Its curve may become broader and heavier with age, especially in mature rams. Deer antlers follow a different pattern. Antlers are solid bone, and they are shed before growing again. A sheep's horn remains in place. Horn size and shape vary widely. Some breeds produce rams with thick spirals curling beside the face. In other breeds, both sexes may have horns. Some sheep are naturally polled, which means they are born without horns. This variation reflects thousands of years of breeding for appearance, safety, handling, and local tradition. The legs carry another clue to the sheep's history. Sheep are even-toed hoofed mammals. The scientific word for this group is ungulate, meaning an animal that walks on hooves. Most of the sheep's weight passes through the third and fourth toes. Those two toes form the visible halves of each split hoof. The hoof can spread slightly as weight presses down, helping the foot meet rough ground with a broader surface. Its hard outer wall supports the body, while softer tissue underneath helps absorb force. On stone, dry soil, and sloping ground, this arrangement gives the animal a stable step, without requiring a wide, flat foot. The position of the eyes works with those feet. A sheep can keep its head low to graze while still watching much of the surrounding area. Its forward vision is less focused than that of a predator, with front-facing eyes, but the broad side view is useful for detecting movement. The jaw completes the grazing system. Sheep do not have upper front teeth. Instead, the lower incisors press grass against a firm dental pad at the front of the upper jaw. A quick pull severs the stems. Farther back, broad cheek teeth grind the plant material before it reaches the stomach. The difference between sheep and goats can seem obvious at first, but domestic breeds often overlap. Sheep usually have stockier bodies and show a strong tendency to graze close to the ground. Many goats are more willing to browse, reaching for leaves, twigs, and shrubs. A goat may stand on its hind legs to reach a branch. A sheep usually keeps its head nearer the grass. These patterns are common rather than absolute. Some sheep browse readily when grass is scarce, and some goats graze for long periods. Coat, horn shape, and tail position also vary enough that no single visible feature separates every sheep from every goat. Their genetic histories remain close as well. Domestic sheep have 54 chromosomes. Chromosomes are packages of genetic material stored inside cells. Some wild species within the genus Ovis have different chromosome numbers, yet they can remain closely related because chromosome changes may alter arrangement without erasing most of the shared genetic information. The fleece may suggest softness, but the body beneath it was shaped for harder conditions. Its hooves manage rough ground. Its eyes guard wide open space. Its jaws keep working through long hours of feeding. The form of the animal reaches far beyond the farmyard, towards steep slopes, exposed plateaus, and the wild sheep that still move through them. Across Eurasia and North America, wild sheep still live in places where the land rises sharply and shelter can be scarce. They belong to the genus Ovis, the scientific group that includes domestic sheep and their wild relatives. Modern genetic classifications commonly recognize 8 living species within this genus, although taxonomists sometimes divide them differently. Their shared lineage reaches back more than 8 million years. During that time, changing climates and shifting continents separated populations across mountains, plateaus, deserts, and northern tundra. Each population faced a slightly different set of problems. In Western and Central Asia, the Asiatic mouflon developed as a relatively small wild sheep with a reddish-brown coat, pale underside, and dark stripe along the back. Its historical range extended from parts of Turkey through the mountains and dry uplands of Western Asia. These mouflons are the principal wild source linked with the earliest domestic sheep. They provide a clearer picture of what the first managed animals may have resembled. Their bodies are leaner than those of many farm breeds. The coat lies close to the skin rather than forming a deep, rounded fleece. Adult males often carry curved horns, while females may have smaller horns or none at all, depending on the population. Farther east, the Ural occupies dry hills and broken country from Iran towards Central Asia. Its long-legged body and lighter build suit landscapes, where food is scattered, and movement between slopes matters. The largest wild sheep are the argali of Central Asia. A mature ram can weigh more than 140 kilograms. In the Marco Polo form found around the Pamir Mountains, the horns may follow a curve measuring close to 1.8 meters. Those horns grow slowly throughout life. They serve during displays and contests between males, when two rams may move apart and then strike horn against horn. Across the mountains of western North America, bighorn sheep use steep cliffs and narrow ledges as protection. The two halves of each hoof can spread slightly, while the softer inner pads press against uneven rock. This combination creates grip on surfaces that would be difficult for a heavy animal with a single rigid hoof. Thinhorn sheep live farther north through Alaska and northwestern Canada. Snow sheep occupy parts of Siberia, where winter cold and exposed terrain demand thick seasonal insulation. The coat of a wild sheep changes with those conditions. Long guard hairs form the outer layer. These coarse fibers resist rubbing, shed some rain, and protect the finer material underneath. A softer undercoat grows denser as temperatures fall. When warmer weather returns, changes in daylight and hormones alter activity inside the hair follicles. Older fibers loosen and are rubbed or shed away. The coat therefore rises and falls with the seasons, instead of growing year after year without release. Natural selection preserved these traits because they solved practical problems. Animals with secure footing were more likely to survive rocky ground. A deeper winter undercoat reduced heat loss. Wide vision and quick reactions helped individuals detect predators before the distance became too small. The family history linking these species is more complicated than a single branching tree. In 2021, researchers compared the genomes of 72 sheep, representing all 8 commonly recognized living ovis species. The analysis found several episodes of introgression. Introgression occurs when members of separated populations interbreed and their genes move into one another's descendants. A population can therefore split, evolve separately, and later reconnect through occasional mating. Domestic sheep remain most strongly connected to Asiatic mouflon, though genes also moved among wild sheep during earlier periods. European mouflon add another layer. Some may partly descend from early domestic sheep carried west by people, which later escaped or were released. Those feral animals could then mix with older wild populations already living in Europe. The result is a family history with branches that separate and cross again. Beneath the fleece of a modern sheep remains a body shaped by this older world. Its feet remember broken stone through their structure. Seasonal coat growth reflects winters endured by wild ancestors. The position of the eyes belongs to an animal feeding in open country, where danger could approach from almost any side. One pair of eyes could cover most of the horizon, though never all of it at once. Survival became more reliable when many animals watched together. That shared watchfulness begins with the shape of the eye. A sheep's eyes sit far apart on the sides of its head. Each pupil stretches horizontally, forming a long, dark opening, rather than the round pupils seen in humans. This arrangement gives the animal a field of view that can approach 305 degrees. While its muzzle remains close to the grass, a sheep can still detect movement across most of the surrounding landscape. Thick facial wool may narrow that view, and the head itself creates a small blind area. Even so, very little can approach an alert sheep without entering the sight of one eye. Wide vision comes with a trade-off. Human eyes face forward, allowing the images from both eyes to overlap across a large central area. That overlap helps the brain judge distance with precision. A sheep has less overlapping vision directly ahead, so unfamiliar surfaces may require extra inspection. When approaching a shadow, a drainage grate, or a sudden change in flooring, the animal may slow down, lower its head, or turn slightly to bring one eye closer. A dark strip across a path can appear deeper than it really is. This helps explain why sheep may hesitate at doorways or refuse to cross a sharp change between sunlight and shade. Out on open ground, the broad view becomes part of a larger system. A relaxed flock does not usually stand shoulder to shoulder. Individuals spread across the available forage, leaving enough room to crop grass without constantly competing for the same mouthful. One animal may lift its head while several others continue feeding. A few seconds later, a different sheep takes over the watch. This shared vigilance allows each member to spend more time eating, while the group maintains awareness. When something unfamiliar appears, the flock changes shape. Heads rise from the grass. Bodies turn toward the same area. The spaces between animals quickly become smaller. If one sheep begins to run, nearby companions often move with it before they have identified the original cause. This rapid copying is called allomimetic behaviour. The term simply means that an action performed by one animal increases the chance that others will perform the same action. A sudden turn can pass through the group like a bend travelling along a ribbon. Stopping spreads in a similar way. Once the first few sheep settle and return to grazing, that calmer behaviour can also move across the flock. No single animal directs every step. Each sheep watches the movements of nearby companions and adjusts its own position. Simple local decisions produce the smooth group motion seen from a distance. Flocking improves safety in several ways. More eyes increase the chance that a predator will be detected early. A tightly gathered group makes it harder for an attacker to isolate one target. The risk carried by each individual also becomes smaller when many possible targets are present, an effect biologists call dilution. This does not make a flock perfectly safe, though it gives each sheep better odds than standing alone in the same open space. The need for company remains strong in domestic animals. A sheep separated from its flock may pace, attempt to escape, and produce repeated high-pitched calls. Researchers can also measure changes in heart rate and stress hormones during isolation. The distress often eases when familiar companions return. Because sheep prefer to remain together, skilled handlers can guide the group by working with its natural movement. Every flock has a flight zone, an invisible area around the animals. When a person steps into that zone, the sheep move away to restore a comfortable distance. Stepping back reduces the pressure. Handlers also use the point of balance, usually near the shoulder. Standing behind that point tends to move a sheep forward. Moving ahead of it can slow the animal or encourage it to turn. Small changes in position can guide many sheep without touching each one. A gate, a dog, or a single person can influence an entire flock because movement spreads from neighbor to neighbor. The behaviour that once helped wild sheep escape predators also gave early humans a way to control many animals at once. A group could be guided toward water, held near a settlement, or moved into a simple enclosure. Once people began deciding where the flock travelled and which animals remained within it, shared movement became the opening through which domestication could take hold. Around the middle of the 9th millennium BCE, human relationships with sheep began changing across Southwest Asia. Small farming settlements had appeared in the northern Fertile Crescent, a broad arc that included southeastern Anatolia, the upper Euphrates, northern Mesopotamia, and the hills of western Iran. People still hunted wild animals, though some communities had begun keeping sheep close to their homes. Domestication unfolded through repeated actions carried out across many generations. Hunters could capture young mouflons from nearby hills and raise them inside or beside a settlement. Groups might guide wild flocks away from dangerous ground, protect them from predators, or prevent them from leaving a useful valley. Extra forage and water could help selected animals survive periods of shortage. Over time, people gained more control over when the sheep moved, which animals were killed, and which adults produced offspring. A detailed record of this transition survives at Aşıklıhöyük in central Turkey. The settlement stood near the Melendez River, close to volcanic highlands where wild sheep and goats could be found. Its early layers date to around 9000 BCE. By approximately 8450 BCE, people were keeping increasing numbers of sheep and goats within the settlement. Archaeologists have found thick deposits of dung and urine salts between buildings. These chemical traces accumulated where animals were penned repeatedly on the same ground. The bones provide another kind of evidence. Researchers examine which ages and sexes died most often. A hunting site may contain animals taken whenever an opportunity appeared. Managed herds usually develop a more selective pattern because people preserve the animals most useful for reproduction. At Aşıklıhöyük, pelvic bones revealed a strong difference between young males and females. Around 58% of the identified males had died before reaching 6 or 7 months of age. Only about 11% of the females died that young. Keeping more females alive allowed the captive group to produce lambs. A smaller number of males could father many of them, making the remaining young males more useful as food. The earlier system may have worked like living storage. People captured wild lambs during the spring, fed them near the settlement, and slaughtered them months later when meat was needed. Some captive animals eventually began breeding. After centuries of this practice, the settlement relied far more heavily on sheep than its earliest residents had. Bones also show that managed sheep gradually became smaller than their wild relatives. Changes in food, movement, breeding, and the ages at which animals reproduced all contributed. Human choices now affected which inherited traits reached the following generation. Sheep that tolerated nearby people were easier to keep. Animals that remained with the group were less likely to escape. Desired body size, horn form, or coat color could become more common whenever their owners allowed those sheep to breed. Ancient DNA has made this slow transformation easier to follow. In 2025, researchers published an analysis of 118 ancient sheep genomes. A genome is the complete set of genetic instructions carried by an animal. The bones in the study covered roughly 12,000 years and came from sites stretching from Mongolia to Ireland. Some of the oldest useful genomes came from sheep living around 8000 BCE at Ashkelhöyük. They were closely related to the population near the origin of later domestic sheep. Their DNA could not explain every feature found in later flocks, however. Other wild populations also contributed genes as sheep moved, mixed, and spread across Eurasia. Domestic ancestry formed a mosaic, assembled from several related sources. The same study found signs that early herders selected traits involving growth rate, horns, and pigmentation. By around 8,000 years ago, sheep living in Europe already carried evidence of selection near a gene influencing coat color. A lighter or more predictable coat may have made individual animals easier to recognize, while later textile production would make pale fiber especially valuable. Small founding flocks also carried less genetic variety than the larger wild populations from which they came. This narrowing is called a population bottleneck. When only a limited number of animals produce most of the offspring, some genetic versions become common, while others disappear by chance. Across thousands of seasons, people change the survival and reproduction of the animals around them. Sheep also changed human routines by creating daily needs for guarding, feeding, pen cleaning, and planned movement. The earliest managed flocks already supplied reliable bodies, milk, hides, and offspring. Their coats remained closer to the seasonal covering of wild sheep, leaving the familiar heavy fleece still waiting to be shaped. For the first herders, the most useful sheep was an animal that could keep producing value while it remained alive. Early domestic sheep were smaller and leaner than many modern breeds. They often had short tails and coats containing far more coarse hair than the deep fleece seen on a Merino. Their bodies supplied meat and fat when slaughtered. Hides could be cleaned and dried for clothing, containers, or shelter coverings. Sinew made strong cord. Horn and bone could be shaped into points, handles, needles, and small tools. Even manure had practical value. Dung collected near pens could be dried for fuel in places with little wood, or spread onto cultivated ground to return nutrients to the soil. Archaeologists describe meat, hide, horn, and bone as primary products. They are usually taken once when the animal dies. Milk, manure, offspring, and eventually wool belong to a different category. These are called secondary products because one living animal can provide them more than once. A ewe kept for several years might give birth during several spring seasons. After lambing, she could also produce milk. Some of that milk nourished her lamb, while people could collect part of the remaining supply. Fresh milk spoils quickly, especially in warm weather. Fermentation offered a way to change it. Helpful bacteria consume some of the milk sugar called lactose and produce acid. The rising acidity slows many harmful microbes and causes milk proteins to gather into soft curds. Draining those curds produces a simple cheese that keeps longer and is easier to carry. Fermented milk can also contain less lactose than fresh milk, making it easier for some adults to digest. These benefits change the value of the flock. Killing a young animal provided an immediate meal. keeping a healthy ewe alive could provide milk, lambs, and manure across several years. Her offspring could enlarge the flock or replace older animals. A living herd became a store of future food that walked from one pasture to another. Fiber probably entered this system gradually. The earliest sheep still followed a strong seasonal coat cycle. As warmer months arrived, fine undercoat loosened beneath the longer guard hairs. People may have collected fibers caught on branches and rough pen walls. Loose material could also be pulled gently from a molting animal or removed with a comb. This process is sometimes called ruing. It survives in a few naturally shedding breeds today, including Soay sheep, whose loosening fleece can be plucked by hand when the annual molt begins. The exact beginnings of sheep fiber use remain difficult to trace. A stone blade or clay vessel can survive underground for thousands of years. An untreated strand of wool usually decays in damp soil. Researchers therefore assemble the history from several kinds of evidence. Rare fibers survive in very dry caves, frozen ground, or waterlogged places where decay is slowed. Clay may preserve the impression of woven cloth after the original textile disappears. A spindle whorl, the small weighted disc used to help a spindle turn, can reveal that people were twisting fibers into thread. Loom weights show where vertical threads were held under tension during weaving. Animal bones, carved images, preserved proteins, and ancient DNA add further pieces. These clues do not point to one sudden moment when people discovered every lifetime product at once. An older archaeological theory described a later secondary products revolution, when milk, wool, and other renewable resources supposedly transformed farming together. Newer evidence shows a slower and more varied pattern. Milk use appeared early in some regions. Large-scale wool production developed later in many places. Different communities adopted each practice according to local animals, climate, labor, and need. The early sheep coat still contained many thick fibers that were useful for rough cord, mats, and coarse cloth. Its fine underlayer was smaller and less even than modern textile wool. Seasonal shedding also meant that valuable fiber could be lost before people collected it. Repeated handling made subtle differences easier to notice. One ewe might produce more soft undercoat than her neighbors. Another might carry pale fibers that accepted dye more evenly. A third might hold the coat for longer before molting. When those animals raised daughters with similar traits, the flock slowly changed. A small advantage gathered from one spring became a breeding choice that could shape many later generations. The useful undercoat was beginning to move from a seasonal extra toward the main harvest of the animal. As fiber became more valuable, the animals carrying it began to look different from their wild relatives. A wild sheep coat usually contains two main layers. Long guard hairs form the outer surface and help protect the body from rain, dirt, and rough stone. Finer fibers grow underneath, trapping air close to the skin during cold weather. When spring arrives, changes in daylight and hormones slow the growth of the winter coat. Loose fibers are then rubbed away, shed onto the ground, or caught on branches. Early herders began favoring sheep with more of the soft underlayer. A ewe producing a thicker layer of fine fiber could provide a larger harvest. Animals that held their coats longer gave people more time to collect them, Across many generations, these small advantages changed the balance of the entire coat. The difference began inside the skin. Sheep grow fibers from tiny structures called follicles. Each follicle is a narrow pocket containing living cells that build a single strand. Two broad follicle types help create the coat. Primary follicles usually produce larger, coarser fibers. They often have nearby sweat glands, oil glands, and small muscles that can lift the hair. Secondary follicles are smaller and usually produce the finer fibers associated with the woolly undercoat. Specialized wool breeds developed a much higher proportion of these secondary follicles. Their coats became more even because fine fibers covered the body more densely, and coarse guard hairs became less common. A modern merino fleece can contain many thousands of fine fibers across a small patch of skin. Each fiber may be only a fraction of the width of a human hair. The result is a deep, closely packed coat that looks very different from the flatter seasonal covering of a mouflon. Color changed as well. Wild sheep often carry brown, reddish, gray, or black pigments that help them blend into rock and dry vegetation. These colors come from melanin, the same general type of pigment found in human skin and hair. Pale fiber offered a practical advantage to textile makers. White wool can be dyed blue, red, yellow, or nearly any other color, without a dark natural pigment changing the result. A dark brown fleece limits the range of colors that can be produced. Ancient DNA shows signs of selection near a gene region called KIT by approximately 8,000 years ago. This region helps control the development and movement of pigment-producing cells. Changes near it can affect whether parts of the coat grow dark, pale, or spotted. Those early genetic signals do not mean that fine white wool had already appeared in its modern form. They show that people were beginning to influence coat color long before the largest wool economies developed. Evidence for highly woolly sheep and organized textile production becomes much stronger in Southwest Asia during the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE. By then, towns and early cities in regions such as Mesopotamia supported workers who washed fiber, spun thread, dyed yarn, and wove cloth. Large flocks could supply material year after year. Breeding decisions increasingly favored pale coats, fine fibers, and reduced seasonal shedding. Domestic sheep still preserve several outcomes of that long process. Hair sheep living in warm regions grow coats dominated by hair and usually shed without annual shearing. Breeds such as the Barbados blackbelly can lose much of their coat naturally as the season changes. Northern double-coated sheep retain a coarse outer layer over a softer inner one. The Icelandic sheep, for example, produces long outer fibers called tog and a finer undercoat called thell. Those two fiber types can be separated and used for different kinds of yarn. Fine wool breeds follow another pattern. Their fleeces contain a more uniform covering dominated by small diameter fibers. Obvious guard hairs are greatly reduced, and much of the coat remains attached until people remove it. Each form reflects a different combination of climate, human need, and inherited follicle activity. Over thousands of breeding seasons, people changed how many fine fibers grew, how long they remained, and how much pigment they carried. The familiar fleece became a record written across millions of tiny structures in the skin. Inside each one, living cells were already beginning the slow work of building a single strand of wool. Beneath the surface, each wool fiber begins inside a narrow pocket called a follicle. The follicle extends downward through the skin like a tiny tube. At its base sits the dermal papilla, a small structure supplied by fine blood vessels. Those vessels carry oxygen, amino acids, minerals, and energy-rich nutrients from the sheep's bloodstream. Around the papilla, living cells divide rapidly. New cells form near the bottom and push older cells upward through the follicle. As they rise, the cells begin filling with a tough protein called keratin. Wool is made mainly from this protein. Keratin also forms human hair and fingernails, along with sheep hooves and the hard outer covering of horns. The cells gradually lose their nuclei, which normally hold genetic material. Their active chemistry slows, then stops. By the time the fiber reaches the surface of the skin, its cells have hardened into an organized column of keratin. The wool growing above the skin contains no nerves or living cells. Cutting that exposed fiber during shearing does not hurt the sheep. The skin underneath remains sensitive, which is why a shearer must keep the blades close to the fleece without cutting the animal. Keratin gains much of its strength from sulfur. One important building block is the amino acid cysteine. Amino acids are the smaller units used to build proteins. Sulfur atoms in nearby cysteine molecules can join together, creating chemical links inside the wool. These links are called disulfide bonds. They help the fiber keep its shape and recover after bending. They also make wool more resistant to heat and many chemicals than a simple chain of loosely connected protein would be. Primary and secondary follicles create different parts of the coat. Primary follicles are generally larger and often produce thicker fibers. In wild sheep and double-coated breeds, those fibers can form coarse outer hairs. Smaller secondary follicles usually produce the finer wool found beneath them. Centuries of breeding increase the number and importance of secondary follicles in specialized wool sheep. A Merino therefore grows a much greater covering of fine fibers than a mouflon-like ancestor. Much of this follicle pattern is established very early. Follicles begin developing before birth, while the lamb is still growing inside the ewe. Their final number and distribution are mostly set before birth or during the first weeks of life. A sheep cannot suddenly grow millions of extra follicles as an adult. Later conditions still change how actively those follicles work. A well-fed sheep may grow wool more quickly and produce a stronger staple. A staple is a small natural lock of fibers taken from the fleece. Poor nutrition can slow growth and reduce fiber diameter. Protein is especially important because wool itself is protein. Energy from food is needed to divide cells at the follicle base. Minerals such as sulfur, zinc, and copper also support normal fiber production, although excessive copper can be dangerous to sheep. Hormones alter wool growth as the animal moves through seasons and stages of life. Pregnancy and milk production place heavy demands on a ewe's body. Nutrients must be shared among her own tissues, the developing lamb, and later the production of milk. Wool growth may slow during these periods. Illness, parasites, fever, or a sudden shortage of feed can create a similar interruption. The finished fleece may preserve evidence of that difficult time. A fiber growing steadily has a fairly even thickness along its length. When the follicle receives fewer nutrients, the new portion may become narrower and weaker. Months later, the fragile place can still be found partway along the staple. Wool growers sometimes call this a break. If many fibers weakened at the same time, the fleece may tear across the same line when it is pulled. The distance from that weak point to the fiber tip can help estimate when the stress occurred. A narrow section may correspond with lambing, illness, drought, or an abrupt change in feed. In this way, a fleece can hold a quiet record of the year in which it grew. Rainfall affects grass. Grass affects nutrition. Nutrition reaches the follicle through blood, then appears later as strength or weakness in the wool. Across the sheep's body, millions of follicles repeat this process at the same time. Each one converts nutrients into hardened protein and pushes the finished material slowly outward. Yet keratin alone would produce a fairly ordinary strand. Wool gains its curl, spring, and ability to hold warmth from structures hidden within the fiber itself. Under a microscope, a wool fiber looks less like a smooth thread and more like a carefully layered structure. Its outer surface is called the cuticle. The cuticle is made from thin, overlapping cells arranged much like roof tiles. Each scale points toward the tip of the fiber, with its lower edge tucked beneath the scale above it. These scales are far too small to feel one by one. Together, however, they change how the fiber moves against nearby fibers. Sliding toward the tip creates less resistance than sliding toward the root. This difference in friction later becomes important when wool is washed, rubbed, or pressed. Beneath the cuticle lies the cortex, which forms most of the fiber. The cortex contains long keratin cells packed tightly together. Two main regions are often called the orthocortex and the paracortex. Those names simply describe groups of cells with slightly different structures. They absorb moisture differently, swell by different amounts, and respond differently as the fiber grows. Because the two sides do not behave in exactly the same way, the fiber bends. The effect is similar to joining two thin strips of material that expand by different amounts. When one side lengthens more than the other, the joined strip curves. Inside wool, that difference repeats along the fiber, creating a series of small waves. Those waves are called crimp. Fine merino wool may contain many tight crimps along a short length. Coarser wool often has broader, more open curves. Crimp gives a fleece much of its spring. When fibers are pressed together, their waves resist flattening completely. Once the pressure is removed, many return toward their earlier shape. This ability helps a wool blanket stay lofty instead of collapsing into a thin, dense layer. Loft means the amount of space held within a mass of fibers. A lofty material contains many tiny air pockets. Air moves heat slowly when it remains trapped, so those spaces help reduce heat loss. The softness of wool is closely tied to fiber diameter. Diameter is measured in microns. 1 micron is 1/1,000,000th of a meter. A human hair may measure roughly 50 to 100 microns across, depending on the person and the part of the hair. Merino fibers are much finer. The finest grades can fall below 17.5 microns. Many common merino fibers measure between about 18 and 22 microns, while broader grades may reach 24 microns or more. A thin fiber bends easily when it touches the skin. Instead of pressing firmly against a nerve ending, it folds away. This is why wool below roughly 19.5 microns is often chosen for clothing worn directly against the body. A thicker fiber resists bending. When the end of a coarse strand sticks out from fabric, it may push against the skin strongly enough to create a prickly feeling. Fibers above roughly 30 to 32 microns are more likely to cause this sensation, especially when their cut ends project from the surface. Softness, therefore, comes from mechanics as much as touch. A fine fiber requires less force to bend. A coarse fiber pushes back more strongly. The scales along the cuticle create another familiar property of wool. When fibers become warm and wet, the keratin softens slightly, and the scales can interact more closely. Rubbing, tumbling, or squeezing causes neighboring fibers to slide past one another. Because movement is easier in one direction than the other, each fiber tends to creep farther into the surrounding mass. The scales catch against nearby fibers and resist sliding back. With enough moisture, heat, pressure, and agitation, the loose fibers become tightly entangled. This process is called felting. A knitted wool garment placed in a hot wash may shrink because its fibers move inward and lock together. The same mechanism can be used deliberately to make dense felt without weaving or knitting conventional cloth. Crimp and cuticle scales therefore give wool two very different abilities. The curled cortex holds fibers apart, creating softness and airspace. The scaled surface can draw them tightly together when the right conditions are applied. Within a strand thinner than a human hair, uneven cell growth creates the curve, while microscopic scales control the direction of movement. Those shapes explain why wool can spring back after compression, and why careless washing can make it shrink. The air held between crimped fibers accounts for part of wool's warmth. Its behaviour becomes even more unusual when moisture, body heat, flame, and the invisible water vapour in the air begin interacting with the protein itself. The air held between curled fibers explains only part of wool's warmth. Each strand also responds to water in two different forms. Liquid water arrives as rain, spilled water, or sweat that is already gathered into droplets. Water vapour is invisible moisture mixed through the air. The outer cuticle of a wool fibre contains a thin, waxy surface that slows the entry of liquid water. A fresh droplet may sit briefly on the outside before soaking deeper into the material. Inside the fibre, the chemistry is more welcoming to water vapour. Keratin contains groups of atoms that can form weak, temporary bonds with passing water molecules. Those molecules move through tiny spaces between the protein structures and become held within the fibre. A material that can take moisture from the surrounding air in this way is described as hygroscopic. Under some conditions, wool can absorb water vapour equal to roughly 35% of its dry weight before it feels clearly wet to the touch. A dry piece of wool weighing 100 grams could therefore hold around 35 grams of absorbed moisture within its fibers. The exact amount changes with temperature, humidity, fiber treatment, and the type of wool. Fine merino wool generally absorbs much more vapor than common polyester fibers. Polyester takes in very little moisture inside the fiber itself. moisture often remains between the synthetic strands or collects on the skin instead. When wool is worn close to the body, vapor can enter the fibers before enough water gathers to feel clammy. This helps regulate the narrow layer of air between skin and fabric, sometimes called the microclimate. As the surrounding air becomes drier, some of the stored moisture gradually leaves the fiber again. Absorption also releases a small amount of heat. The water molecules give up energy as they attach to parts of the keratin. When the fiber later releases that moisture, the reverse process uses a little heat. This exchange is real, though limited. A wet wool blanket cannot create an endless supply of warmth, and a fully soaked fleece will eventually lose much of the insulating benefit provided by trapped air. Wool performs best when its different structures work together. Crimp prevents the fibers from lying completely flat, preserving many small pockets of relatively still air. Air conducts heat slowly, so these pockets reduce the speed at which warmth moves away from the body. Within each fiber, coiled protein structures can stretch slightly under pressure. Bundles of those proteins bend as the wool is compressed, while the chemical links between them help guide the fiber back toward its earlier shape. This recovery helps blankets, mattress fillings, carpets, and clothing retain thickness after repeated use. The same protein chemistry affects what happens near a flame. Keratin contains substantial amounts of nitrogen, along with sulfur, and absorb moisture. Heating the fiber must first drive away some of that water and break strong chemical bonds. Under standardized tests, wool generally requires temperatures of approximately 570 to 600 degrees Celsius before it ignites. Once the flame source is removed, burning often slows or stops. The surface tends to form a dark char that limits the oxygen and heat reaching material underneath. Wool may smolder under some conditions, though it usually supports flame less readily than many common fibers. It also keeps its solid form instead of melting into hot liquid droplets. Many synthetic materials soften and melt when heated. Molten material can stick to skin or spread fire to another surface. Wool's tendency to char has helped make it useful in bedding, aircraft interiors, upholstered furniture, carpets, and protective clothing. These properties arise from several parts of the fiber working at once. The cuticle delays liquid wetting. Keratin binds invisible vapor within the strand. Crimp holds insulating air, while the protein structure provides recovery after compression. Nitrogen-rich fiber then offers useful resistance when exposed to heat and flame. The comfort associated with wool is therefore rooted in measurable exchanges of air, moisture, force, and temperature. Human breeding gradually increased the amount of this useful material carried by each animal. As fleeces became denser and remained on the body for longer periods, the sheep lost more of the seasonal release that had once removed its coat without human help. In wild sheep, the yearly coat usually follows a seasonal cycle. As days lengthen and temperatures rise, changes in hormones affect the follicles beneath the skin. Older fibers loosen. The animal rubs against rock, bark, or rough ground, and parts of the winter coat fall away. This natural release is called molting. Many domestic sheep still shed in much the same way. Hair sheep grow coats containing more coarse hair and less dense wool. breeds such as the Barbados black belly often lose much of their winter covering without being clipped. Soay sheep, descended from an old population kept on the islands of St Kilda off western Scotland, can also release their fleece naturally. When the fibres begin to loosen, people may remove them by hand in a process called rueing. Wiltshire horn sheep follow a similar pattern. They were developed in southern England and are known for shedding their coats, which reduces the need for annual shearing. Other domestic sheep fall between full shedding and complete fleece retention. A double-coated breed may release some soft underwool, while longer outer fibres remain attached. The exact result depends on follicle type, inherited coat cycles, climate, nutrition, and the individual animal. Fine wool breeds sit near the opposite end of this range. A Merino usually retains most of its fleece until people remove it. The follicles continue producing fibre, while the annual molt remains too weak to release the coat in a useful way. This pattern became common because generations of breeders favoured sheep that held valuable wool on the body. A fibre left on a branch could not be washed, spun, or sold. A fleece that remained intact until harvest was easier to collect and grade. As retention increased, natural shedding became less important to the animal's reproductive success. Human care replaced part of the old seasonal cycle. Many wool breeds are now shorn about once each year. The timing varies with local weather and the needs of the flock. In a cool region, shearing too early can leave sheep exposed to cold rain and wind. A recently shorn animal has lost most of the air-filled layer that slowed heat loss. Shelter and dry bedding become especially important during sudden storms. In warmer climates, delaying shearing can leave the sheep carrying a thick coat through high temperatures. The extra insulation may make it harder to release body heat, particularly when the fleece is heavy or damp. Pregnancy and lambing also affect the schedule. Handling a ewe close to birth requires care. Some farmers shear before lambing so the ewe seeks shelter more readily, and the newborn lamb can find the udder without pushing through long wool. Others choose a different time because of climate, feeding conditions, or local practice. A missed shearing can create several problems. Long fleece collects dust, seeds, dried mud, and manure. Moisture may remain close to the skin, especially where wool has become matted. Heavy fleece can restrict movement or cover the eyes. Warm, soiled areas around the rear of the animal may attract flies. Certain blowflies lay eggs in damp wool, and the feeding larvae can injure the skin beneath it. This condition is called fly strike and requires prompt treatment. The familiar appearance of an overgrown sheep can seem harmless from a distance, though the weight and contamination may place real strain on the animal. Good shearing is designed to remove the fleece quickly while keeping the sheep secure. The shearer positions the animal so its weight is supported and its legs remain controlled. Electric clippers pass close to the skin in long, planned strokes. An experienced worker tries to remove the main fleece as one connected sheet. The wool itself contains no nerves, so cutting the fibre causes no pain. The living skin underneath can still be nicked. Sharp, well-maintained equipment and careful technique reduce that risk. Short restraint also matters because sheep may become stressed when separated or held in an unfamiliar position. Once released, the animal stands with only a thin covering of newly cut fiber. The heavy coat lies nearby in the shape of the body that grew it. It carries grease from the skin, dry plant fragments, dust, and fibers of several different qualities. Before any part of it can become soft yarn or a warm blanket, that uneven sheet must be opened, cleaned, sorted, and reorganized. Spread across a sorting table, the fleece still holds the shape of the sheep that grew it. The shoulder wool may be soft and even. Fibers from the belly are often shorter and dirtier. Wool near the rear can contain stains, dried manure, and matted locks. The first task is called skirting. Workers remove the heavily soiled edges, tangled sections, and plant-filled pieces from the cleaner central fleece. This separation matters because one animal does not produce identical wool across its entire body. Fibers from the shoulder and side often grow more evenly than those from the legs or belly. The fleece is then examined for qualities that determine how it can be used. Diameter is measured in microns or millionths of a meter. Staple length describes the length of a natural lock. Strength reveals whether the fibers can survive pulling during processing. Color, crimp, and contamination also affect value. A pale, strong fleece filled with even fibers may be suitable for fine clothing. Coarser wool can work well in rugs, durable blankets, or insulation. A weak staple may break during spinning, especially if the sheep experienced illness or poor nutrition while the fiber was growing. Raw wool also contains material that must be washed away. The sheep's skin produces wool grease, a thick coating that helps protect the fibers and skin from weather. Dried perspiration leaves behind salts known as suint. Dust settles deep into the fleece, while seeds and fragments of grass become caught between the crimps. Scouring removes much of this material using warm water and detergent. Temperature and movement must be controlled carefully. Excessive rubbing in warm water can begin felting the fibers before they are ready. The grease lifted from the wool is a complex mixture of natural waxes. After cleaning and refining, part of it can become lanolin, which is used in skin creams, ointments, polishes, and other products. Lanolin is therefore refined from wool grease, rather than being one pure substance collected directly from the sheep. Once clean, the fibers still point in many directions. Carding begins to organize them. Rows of fine teeth pull the wool apart, separate tangled locks, and spread the fibers into a soft web. This web may be gathered into a loose rope, called a roving. The fibers in carded wool remain only partly aligned, leaving many crossing angles and small air spaces. That arrangement helps produce lofty yarn with a warm, slightly fuzzy surface. Longer fibers intended for smoother fabric may continue through combing. Combs draw the strands into a much more parallel arrangement and remove many short fibers. The prepared bundle is called top. This closely aligned material is commonly used for worsted yarn. Spinning gives both preparations their lasting strength. A single wool fiber may be only a few centimeters long and can be pulled away from its neighbors easily. When many fibers are twisted together, their scaled surfaces press against one another. Friction prevents them from sliding apart freely. Tension placed on the yarn is then shared across many overlapping fibers, instead of resting on one strand. The amount of twist changes the result. Too little can leave the yarn weak. Heavy twist creates a firmer and denser thread. A woolen yarn made from carded fibre usually traps more air and has a softer, fuller appearance. Worsted yarn made from combed fibre tends to be smoother because the longer strands lie in similar directions. It can produce sharply defined woven cloth, fine suiting, and durable fabric with less surface fuzz. Finished yarn can be woven by crossing lengthwise and sideways threads. Knitting forms connected loops that stretch more easily. Felt follows a different route. Moisture, pressure, and agitation encourage loose wool fibers to creep past one another until their cuticle scales lock together. A dense sheet can form without spinning yarn or building a woven structure. By the time the process is complete, the original fleece has been divided and reorganized many times. Grease and soil have been removed. Fibers have been sorted by measurable qualities, then aligned according to the fabric they will become. Twist has turned short strands into a continuous thread, capable of traveling far beyond the flock. Once wool could be prepared with this level of control, every annual shearing produced a material that could be counted, stored, traded, and assigned to specialized workers. A prepared bundle of wool could travel much farther than the animal that produced it. Once spun into yarn or woven into cloth, it could be stored for months, carried across dry country, divided into measured amounts, or exchanged for food and tools. The sheep could then grow another fleece. This repeatable harvest gave wool a special place in early economies. A hide was taken once. A fleece returned year after year, provided the animal survived and remained healthy. By the 4th and 3rd millennia BCE, wool had become deeply connected with the growing cities of Southwest Asia. In Mesopotamia, the region between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, temples and palaces controlled land, labor, animals, and stored goods. Large flocks grazed outside settlements, while administrators kept records of their movement and output. The work began with shepherds who guarded the animals and guided them between pastures. When the coat was ready, fibers were plucked or cut, depending on the sheep and the period. Washers removed grease and dirt. Sorters separated fine wool from rougher material. Spinners turned loose fiber into thread, often using a spindle weighted with a small disc called a spindle whorl. The whorl helped the spindle continue turning smoothly, allowing twist to travel into the fibers. Dyers treated yarn with plant, mineral, or insect-based colors. Weavers stretched long threads called the warp across a loom. On many upright looms, clay or stone weights hung from the lower ends of those threads. These loom weights kept the warp straight and under steady tension, while another thread passed across it. After weaving, fullers cleaned and pressed the cloth, sometimes using moisture and repeated movement to thicken the surface. Merchants arranged exchange. Transporters moved finished textiles by boat, pack animal or cart. Scribes recorded the animals, workers, rations, and finished goods. Clay tablets from Mesopotamia sometimes preserve details that the cloth itself has lost. One record may list how much grain a spinner received. Another may count sheep assigned to a shepherd. Some tablets track bundles of wool, lengths of fabric, or groups of workers attached to a temple household. The writing survives because wet clay hardened into a durable surface. Most ancient textiles disappeared. Plant fibers and wool are easily broken down by moisture, fungi, insects, and soil bacteria. A woven cloth can vanish completely, while its tools remain. Spindle whorls survive because they were made from fired clay, stone, or bone. Loom weights remain after wooden looms have rotted. Occasionally, wet clay preserves the impression of cloth pressed against it. Rare fibers survive in unusually dry caves, frozen ground, salt, or waterlogged places where normal decay slows. Archaeologists must therefore rebuild the wool economy from scattered traces. Animal bones reveal flock size, age, and sex patterns. Images on seals or carved objects may show sheep, garments, or textile work. Chemical tests can identify proteins left by animal fibers. Ancient DNA can reveal changes in coat color and body form. Written records add quantities and names that no fragment of cloth could preserve by itself. This evidence also changed how scholars understand the rise of wool production. An older model described a secondary products revolution, in which people suddenly began using milk, wool, and other renewable resources as one major package. Later research shows a more gradual pattern. Different regions adopted milk, traction, and fiber at different times. Wool production grew especially important where suitable sheep, skilled workers, trade networks, and organized institutions came together. As the system expanded, wool became easier to compare. A buyer could notice that one fleece produced finer thread. Another might contain longer staples that survived spinning with fewer breaks. White wool accepted a wider range of dyes, while coarse fiber suited heavy cloth or rugs. These differences reached back into the flock. Animals producing more valuable coats were more likely to be kept for breeding. A tiny change measured across one fiber could influence the future of hundreds of sheep. Over generations, that pressure produced flocks shaped for increasingly narrow purposes, including one breed whose fine wool would eventually become famous across several continents. In Spain, that pressure gathered around the Merino. Its value came from a fleece packed with fine, tightly crimped fibers. Because each strand had a small diameter, it bent easily against the skin and could be spun into smooth, light yarn. A dense merino fleece also produced a large amount of usable wool from one animal. By the 12th century, merino sheep were already known in Spain. Their deeper origin is still debated, though the breed developed into its famous form under Spanish selection. Breeders favored sheep with pale fleece, strong crimp, and fibers fine enough for high-quality cloth. The animals became closely tied to seasonal movement. Large flocks traveled between summer pasture in the cooler north and winter pasture farther south. This regular movement is called transhumance. Some routes stretched for hundreds of kilometers across the Iberian Peninsula. By the late Middle Ages, the powerful sheep owners' organization known as the Mesta helped protect these routes. Established in the 13th century, it defended access to grazing land and gave flock owners legal influence. Fine wool became one of Spain's most valuable exports. That value encouraged strict control over breeding animals. For centuries, exporting merino sheep was heavily restricted. Spain could sell fleece abroad while keeping the animals that produced it within the kingdom. This protected the genetic resource behind the wool. During the 18th century, selected merino flocks began moving into other parts of Europe. Sheep were sent to royal and state-supported breeding programs in France, Saxony, Prussia, and other regions. Each population was then shaped further for local climates and textile needs. The movement of breeding stock carried more than animals. It transferred inherited traits built through centuries of selection. A small group of rams and ewes could influence thousands of descendants if their offspring were repeatedly chosen for breeding. That process reached Australia near the end of the 18th century. In 1797, Captain Henry Waterhouse and Lieutenant William Kent obtained 26 merino sheep at the Cape of Good Hope. The flock then travelled by sea toward Port Jackson, the harbour beside the young British colony of Sydney. The voyage was long and difficult for animals confined aboard a wooden ship. Fresh water, feed, ventilation, and stable footing were limited. More than half of the sheep reportedly died before arrival. The survivors became unusually important. Some were acquired by John and Elizabeth MacArthur, who were developing a flock on land near Parramatta. The MacArthurs bred merinos with other sheep already in the colony, then continued selecting animals with finer and more valuable fleece. By 1803, their flock had grown to approximately 4,000 sheep. 4 years later, in 1807, Australian-grown wool from their animals was sent to England for sale. Australia offered enormous areas of grazing land from the viewpoint of British settlers. Its seasons also allowed wool production to expand at a scale that would have been difficult in crowded parts of Europe. Merino bloodlines spread through colonial flocks. Shearing sheds, transport routes, ports, and textile markets grew around the yearly harvest. By the late 19th century, wool had become Australia's leading export. The phrase "riding on the sheep's back" later described how strongly the national economy depended on the industry. That growth carried heavy consequences across the land. Pastoral expansion pushed sheep into grasslands and open woodlands already cared for and used by Aboriginal communities. Colonial governments granted large areas to settlers, often without recognizing existing ownership or cultural ties. Fencing and grazing changed access to water, food plants, and traditional routes. Hooves compacted some soils, while repeated grazing altered plant communities. Introduced livestock also competed with native animals in certain regions. The same fine fibre that created wealth therefore reshaped settlement and land control. Its diameter could be measured in millionths of a metre. Yet the demand for it influenced ships crossing oceans and farms spreading across a continent. Selective breeding had concentrated one valuable trait so successfully that an entire industry formed around it. Merino wool represented an extreme solution to the search for fine fibre. Elsewhere, people needed sheep that could survive heat, store body fat, produce more milk, or shed their coats without shearing. Those different pressures created a much wider range of animals than the soft white merino alone could ever represent. Beyond the merino, domestic sheep take on forms that can seem almost unrelated. A Wiltshire horn carries a short coat that loosens and falls away with the seasons. So a sheep remains small, agile, and close in appearance to early northern European animals. East Frisian ewes have been selected for milk production, and may produce several hundred litres during one lactation under managed conditions. Large meat breeds such as the Suffolk develop broad bodies and rapid-growing lambs. All belong to the same domestic species, Ovis aries. More than 200 recognized breeds exist, depending on which organizations and definitions are used. The total becomes much larger when local populations and land races are included. A land race is a group shaped gradually within one region, often through a mixture of farmer selection and natural survival, rather than a tightly controlled written breed standard. Breed formation begins whenever part of a population becomes separated from the rest. A few animals may be carried to an island, valley, or distant country. This starting group contains only part of the genetic variety found in the original population. The effect is called a founder effect. If the isolated flock breeds mostly within itself, inherited traits that were uncommon elsewhere may become frequent there. Human choices then add another layer. Farmers may keep daughters from the best milk-producing ewes. Rams with rapid-growing lambs may father a larger share of the next generation. Animals that survive local winters, parasites, or dry summers are also more likely to reproduce. Across many generations, these repeated differences change the frequency of genes within the flock. The result can be seen clearly in the coat. Soay sheep, named after the island of Soay in the St Kilda group west of Scotland, usually carry brown or tan coats and molt naturally. Their small bodies and seasonal fleece resemble older northern short-tailed sheep more closely than modern fine wool breeds. Wiltshire horn sheep also shed, leaving loose patches of winter coat during spring. Their owners avoid the conventional yearly shearing required by Merinos and many other wool breeds. In warmer regions, hair sheep such as the Barbados blackbelly grow light coats that release body heat more easily. A heavy fleece would make hot, humid conditions harder to tolerate. Cold and wet climates have favored another arrangement. Icelandic sheep carry two fiber layers. Long, coarse outer wool sheds rain and resists abrasion. A softer inner layer traps insulating air near the skin. People can separate these fibers and spin them into yarns with different strengths and textures. Some sheep store energy in a place that is visible from a distance. Fat-tail breeds are common across parts of North Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Large deposits of fat collect around the tail and hindquarters. During seasons when pasture is poor, the animal can draw on this stored energy. The structure serves a role similar to the hump of a camel, although the fat is held around the rear of the sheep. Altitude has shaped other populations more deeply inside the body. Tibetan sheep live on plateaus where the air contains less oxygen than at sea level. Hypoxia is the term for this reduced oxygen supply. Over generations, high-altitude populations developed inherited differences affecting blood flow, red blood cells, and the way oxygen is carried and used. These traits help tissues receive enough oxygen during grazing and movement several thousand meters above sea level. Local sheep may produce less wool or meat than an imported commercial breed, yet they often carry valuable survival traits. One population may tolerate heat efficiently. Another may resist local parasites or maintain body condition on rough forage. A breed developed in damp coastal country may cope better, with persistent rain and soft ground than an animal selected in a dry inland climate. This diversity acts as a biological reserve. Future farmers may need genes linked with drought tolerance, disease resistance, or lower heat stress as climates change. Modern breeding can narrow that reserve when a small number of highly productive lines spread widely. Ancient genome studies show that many older sheep populations carried genetic combinations later reduced during formal breed development. Preserving land races therefore protects more than unusual colors or horn shapes. It keeps practical options available for conditions that may become important again. The familiar white sheep now divides into hundreds of forms shaped by islands, deserts, mountain plateaus, and human economies. Their bodies vary widely, though everyone still depends on the same hidden community inside the digestive system. That community performs the chemical work that turns grass and leaves into the energy required for movement, milk, growth, and fleece. A sheep lowers its head, closes its lower front teeth against the firm dental pad above them, and pulls a mouthful of grass free. The stems are chewed only briefly before being swallowed. They travel down the esophagus and enter the largest chamber of the digestive system, the rumen. Sheep are often described as having 4 stomachs. A more accurate picture is one stomach divided into 4 specialized compartments: the rumen, reticulum, omasum, and abomasum. The rumen is the largest. In an adult sheep, it can hold several liters of partly digested plant material, liquid, gas, and living microbes. Its warm, moist interior remains close to normal body temperature and contains very little oxygen. Those conditions support a crowded community of bacteria, archaea, fungi, and single-celled organisms called protozoa. The sheep provides them with grass, water, warmth, and a protected place to live. In return, the microbes perform chemical work that the sheep could not complete alone. Grass contains cellulose, a tough carbohydrate that strengthens plant cell walls. Human digestive enzymes cannot break cellulose apart efficiently. The sheep also lacks the necessary enzymes in its own tissues. Microbes in the rumen produce them. Fungi help open the tougher plant material. Bacteria cut long cellulose molecules into smaller pieces. Other microbes use those products during fermentation, a process that releases energy without oxygen. Fermentation produces several chemicals called volatile fatty acids. Despite the name, these acids do not remain as visible fat inside the rumen. They dissolve in the fluid and pass through the rumen wall into the bloodstream. The 3 major forms are acetate, propionate, and butyrate. Acetate provides energy and contributes to the production of body fat and milk fat. Propionate travels mainly to the liver, where it becomes an important raw material for making glucose. Butyrate supplies energy to tissues lining the digestive system and can be changed into other useful compounds. Together, these acids provide a large share of the sheep's usable energy. The first swallow does not finish the meal. Larger plant pieces move between the rumen and the reticulum, a smaller compartment with a lining shaped like a honeycomb. The reticulum helps sort material by size and density. When the sheep rests, muscles in these chambers push a small mass of coarse food back up the esophagus. The animal brings it into the mouth and begins chewing again. This returned food is called cud. Slow, repeated chewing breaks the stems into shorter pieces and exposes more surface area to microbes. It also mixes the food with large amounts of saliva. Sheep saliva contains substances that help control acidity inside the rumen. Fermentation naturally produces acids, and the added saliva helps keep conditions within a range where the microbial community can continue working. After more chewing, the cud is swallowed again. Small particles and fluid eventually pass into the omasum. Its inner surface contains many thin folds that resemble the pages of a book. These folds absorb water, minerals, and some remaining fermentation products while helping regulate the flow of material. The contents then enter the abomasum. This chamber releases acid and digestive enzymes, making it the part most similar to a human stomach. Microbes that grew inside the rumen are carried here as well. Their cells contain protein. The sheep digests them, then absorbs the released amino acids farther along the intestine. Those amino acids eventually reach muscles, milk-producing tissue, and the follicles growing wool. Sulfur-containing amino acids are especially important because wool keratin contains many sulfur bonds. Energy from volatile fatty acids powers cell division at the follicle base. Minerals support the enzymes and chemical reactions involved in fiber production. A shortage of protein or energy can slow wool growth. Severe underfeeding may produce thinner fibers and a weak point across the fleece. A well-fed sheep can grow stronger wool more steadily, although genetics and health still set important limits. The fiber on the animal's back therefore begins with sunlight captured by grass. Plant cells store that energy. Rumen microbes unlock it. The sheep absorbs the products and sends nutrients through the blood to millions of follicles. Grass becomes heat, movement, milk, and a new length of keratin fiber. This partnership works wherever enough forage can be found. The difficulty is that pasture does not grow evenly through the year, and flocks have often survived by moving toward each season's temporary supply. A full rumen can hold a sheep through part of the day, but the microbial community inside it needs a steady supply of plants. When grass dries under summer heat, its leaves become tougher and less nutritious. Deep winter can cover the same pasture with snow. In mountain regions, the richest grazing ground may shift upward as warmer weather melts the snow and exposes fresh plants. For many shepherding communities, the practical response was movement. Instead of storing enough cut feed for every season, people guided their animals toward places where forage was already growing. This regular seasonal movement is called transhumance. The word describes livestock and their keepers traveling between established grazing areas as the year changes. Routes are repeated. Destinations are known in advance. Families may use the same mountain pass, river crossing, or resting ground across many generations. A common form is vertical transhumance. During winter, flocks remain in lower valleys where temperatures are milder and snow is less persistent. As spring reaches the uplands, sheep begin climbing toward summer pasture. Higher ground often stays cooler and greener after lowland grass has dried. In autumn, the flock descends before heavy snow closes the route. The date of departure cannot be chosen from a calendar alone. A late winter may leave mountain passes blocked. Warm spring rain can produce early growth. Lambs born only a few weeks earlier may need time to become strong enough for a long journey. Water sources must still be flowing along the route. Shepherds also consider disease, predators, storms, and the condition of each grazing area. Moving too early can place sheep on cold ground with little food. Arriving too late allows mature plants to become coarse and less nourishing. Traditional routes, therefore, contain detailed local knowledge. A shepherd may know which slope loses snow first and where a stream continues running during a dry month. Certain plants reveal whether the pasture is ready. The behaviour of insects, birds, and wild herbivores can also signal changes in the season. Movement depends on the flock's own social behaviour. Sheep tend to remain near familiar companions, allowing a few people to guide many animals. Narrow paths, stone walls, fences, and temporary pens help direct the group. Bells attached to selected animals make the flock easier to locate in fog, woodland, or broken ground. Their different tones can sometimes help an experienced shepherd recognize particular animals from a distance. Dogs may perform two separate kinds of work. A herding dog, such as a border collie, moves around the flock and uses controlled pressure to gather or redirect sheep. Its position influences the animal's flight zones, causing them to turn or move forward. A livestock guardian dog behaves differently. Breeds such as the Great Pyrenees or the Merino sheepdog live close to the flock and treat the grazing area as territory. Their size, scent, and barking can discourage wolves, stray dogs, or other predators from approaching. The travelling group may stop at repeated camps, where people repair equipment, check hooves, and examine animals for injury. Portable fencing can create a night enclosure. In older systems, low stone shelters or wooden huts provided protection in exposed country. The journey may cover a modest distance between nearby elevations or extend across hundreds of kilometers. Transhumance still continues in parts of Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. In 2023, UNESCO expanded its recognition of the practice as intangible cultural heritage. The multinational inscription included Albania, Andorra, Austria, Croatia, France, Greece, Italy, Luxembourg, Romania, and Spain. This recognition focused on the knowledge, social customs, and practical skills carried through the seasonal movement of livestock. A flock travelling uphill in spring becomes a moving calendar. Its route follows snowmelt and new plant growth. The return journey responds to shortening days and approaching winter. Inside every sheep, rumen microbes continue fermenting the grasses found along the way. Movement can give plants in one pasture time to recover while another area is used. The result depends on timing and intensity. Each bite removes leaf tissue. Every hoof presses against soil. Dung and urine return nutrients in concentrated patches. The flock's path therefore leaves a biological record across the land, shaped by how many animals pass, how long they remain, and how soon the vegetation is grazed again. A sheep can lower its mouth almost to the soil and clip a grass blade close to its base. That bite removes part of the plant's photosynthetic surface. Photosynthesis is the process through which leaves use sunlight to build sugars from carbon dioxide and water. With fewer green leaves, the plant has less surface available to capture energy until new growth appears. A healthy grass plant can often recover from one grazing event during its active season. Stored energy in the roots and lower stems supports the first replacement leaves. Those fresh leaves then begin producing more sugar. Recovery becomes harder when the same plant is bitten again, before it has rebuilt enough leaf area. Repeated removal can shrink the root system, reduce seed production, and leave the plant less able to survive drought. The timing between visits matters as much as the number of sheep. A pasture grazed briefly and then rested may respond very differently from one occupied continuously for several weeks. Stocking density describes how many animals use a given area. Duration measures how long they remain. Rainfall, soil type, season, and plant species also change the result. A dense flock on wet ground can produce more damage in 2 days than a smaller flock causes over a longer period on firm, dry soil. Sheep also choose among plants. They may repeatedly crop soft grasses while leaving behind bitter, thorny, or fibrous species. The preferred plants then lose more leaf tissue than their neighbors. Less desirable species gain access to sunlight and soil moisture, gradually changing the balance of the plant community. Careful grazing can use this preference as a tool. Sheep have been brought into vineyards, orchards, solar farms, and conservation areas to control low vegetation. Timed grazing can reduce certain invasive plants before they set seed. It may also keep grasslands open where shrubs would otherwise spread, and shade out sun-loving flowers. In fire-prone regions, sheep can remove part of the dry, fine vegetation that allows flames to travel quickly across the ground. Useful results depend on leaving enough cover to protect the soil. Bare ground receives the full force of rain and wind. Water moving across an exposed slope can carry away fine soil particles. Around streams, repeated hoof traffic may break down banks and cloud the water with sediment. Recently burned ground can be especially vulnerable because roots and surface cover have already been damaged. Hooves create smaller effects with every step. Moderate trampling can press seeds against the soil and break standing dead stems into material that decomposes more easily. Heavy traffic on wet clay can squeeze soil particles tightly together. This compaction reduces the spaces through which air and water normally move. Plant roots may then have difficulty pushing downward. Dung and urine return nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and other nutrients to the land. Seeds can also pass through the digestive system or become carried in fleece and manure. These materials are not distributed evenly. Sheep often gather near shade, water, gateways, and sleeping areas. Nutrients become concentrated in those places, creating rich patches while more distant parts of the pasture receive less. The digestive process also produces a gas that leaves the pasture entirely. During fermentation, rumen microbes break plant material apart and release hydrogen. A group of microbes called methanogenic archaea uses that hydrogen along with carbon compounds. Their metabolism produces methane. Most of this gas leaves through belching rather than from the other end of the digestive system. Methane remains in the atmosphere for less time than carbon dioxide, but it traps considerably more heat molecule for molecule while it is present. Individual sheep differ in the amount they release. Part of that variation comes from diet, body size, feed intake, and digestion speed. Research also suggests that low methane and high methane sheep can support different microbial pathways for handling hydrogen inside the rumen. Breeding and feeding studies are exploring whether those differences can reduce emissions without harming health or production. Wool can regrow each year and eventually break down under suitable conditions. Those useful qualities do not remove the wider effects of raising the animal. Land use, transport, washing, energy consumption, and methane all belong to the complete production system. The same sheep may support a healthy open grassland under careful management, or contribute to erosion when too many animals remain too long. The landscape records the combined pressure of every bite, hoof placement, resting site, and management decision. Guiding those effects requires understanding how sheep choose where to feed, which companions they follow, and how a flock behaves when food, space, or safety changes. Within a grazing flock, every sheep is making small adjustments almost continuously. One animal steps toward a patch of fresh grass. Its neighbor shifts sideways to keep enough feeding room. A third moves closer to a familiar ewe when something unusual appears near the edge of the field. These individual choices create the larger shape seen from a distance. Sheep are strongly gregarious, meaning they naturally seek the company of others. Their preferred spacing changes with activity and danger. During calm grazing, the flock spreads across the pasture, so each animal can reach plants without constant competition. A single sheep may spend between 8 and 12 hours feeding during a day, depending on the quality and amount of forage. That time is divided into grazing bouts that often last around 20 to 90 minutes. Periods of cud chewing and rest appear between them. When the flock pauses, many animals settle at roughly the same time. Some remain standing and ruminating. Others lie with their legs folded beneath the body. This matching of activity is called behavioral synchronization. Movement, feeding, and rest spread through the group because each sheep pays attention to nearby companions. Spacing tightens quickly when risk increases. A sudden sound may bring several heads upright. Animals near the edge move inward. The flock becomes denser as individuals seek the protection of the group. Shade and water can create a similar gathering for a different reason. On a hot afternoon, dozens of sheep may crowd beneath a small group of trees because the coolest ground is concentrated there. That crowding can also increase pushing and competition. Food placed in one narrow trough produces another pressure point. Sheep with higher social rank may displace others from the best position. Rank is usually communicated through small actions before serious fighting becomes necessary. One sheep may approach directly until another steps aside. A stronger animal can push with its shoulder, rest its chin across another sheep's back, or paw the ground before a challenge. Rams may use their horns during more forceful contests, especially in the breeding season. Stable relationships reduce the need to repeat these encounters constantly. Once two animals have learned which one usually yields, a simple approach may be enough to settle access to space or feed. The flock also contains family structure. Ewes often remain near daughters, sisters, and other female relatives. These matrilineal groups are connected through the female line. A ewe may continue associating with an adult daughter long after that daughter has raised lambs of her own. Young males commonly begin leaving ewe groups at around 1 to 2 years of age in more natural social systems. They may form bachelor groups with other males. As the breeding season approaches, competition among rams increases. Their rank can influence which males gain access to receptive ewes. Familiarity matters alongside family ties. Sheep housed with known companions usually settle more easily than animals placed among strangers. Sudden mixing forces them to learn new ranks and personal distances. This can increase pushing, chasing, and interruption of feeding. Crowding makes the problem stronger because lower-ranking animals have fewer ways to move away. Isolation produces a different kind of strain. A separated sheep may call repeatedly, pace along a fence, or search for an opening. Heart rate and stress hormones can rise. The presence of even one familiar companion may reduce some of these reactions. Good flock management therefore includes enough feeding space, predictable grouping, and care when animals must be separated. From far away, the group may still look like one pale mass moving across green ground. Up close, its order depends on remembered neighbors, family lines, feeding rank, and the changing distance between bodies. Each animal chooses where to stand, partly by recognizing who is beside it. The apparent sameness of the flock hides a world of individual faces, and sheep are far better at telling those faces apart than their reputation suggests. A distant group of sheep can appear almost uniform. White backs overlap, heads lower toward the grass, and one animal seems to blend into the next. At close range, the flock contains many differences. The width of the muzzle varies. Dark markings may surround one eye. Horn shape, ear position, voice, scent, and walking style can all help identify an individual. Sheep learn these details because recognition has practical value. A familiar ewe may be safe to rest beside. A dominant animal may take the best place at a feeding trough. A known handler may bring food, while an unfamiliar person may cause caution. Researchers have tested this ability by showing sheep photographs of faces. In earlier experiments, sheep learned to identify as many as 50 individual sheep from pictures. Some recognition remained after more than 2 years without seeing the same photographs. That is a substantial period in the life of a farm animal. The sheep were not simply responding to one obvious patch of color. They used the overall arrangement of the face, including the spacing of the eyes and the shape of the head. Turning a familiar image upside down made recognition harder. This effect suggests that sheep process a face as an organized pattern, rather than as a loose collection of separate marks. A well-known experiment published in 2017 extended the test to human faces. 8 Welsh mountain sheep were trained inside a testing enclosure. A screen displayed 2 photographs at a time. One image showed a selected celebrity, while the other showed an unfamiliar person. The 4 trained faces belonged to Barack Obama, Emma Watson, Fiona Bruce, and Jake Gyllenhaal. When a sheep approached the correct photograph, a food reward became available. Choosing the unfamiliar face ended that trial without the reward. After training, the sheep selected the upright target photographs with an average accuracy close to 79%. The animals had learned visual differences among human faces that shared many of the same basic features. Each image contained 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and a similar forward-facing view. Recognition therefore required attention to smaller differences in shape and proportion. The researchers then tilted the familiar photographs. Accuracy fell to roughly 66%. The sheep still perform better than random choice, though changing the angle disturbed the facial pattern they had learned. Humans experience a related difficulty when familiar faces are shown upside down or at unusual angles. This similarity does not mean that sheep understand human identity in exactly the same way people do. It shows that orientation and the arrangement of features matter to both visual systems. A later part of the experiment used the face of a person the sheep knew from daily care. The animals had never been trained to choose a photograph of this handler. Even so, they selected the familiar person's image in approximately 71.8% of trials. The results suggest that sheep can transfer recognition from a living person to a flat photograph. They had encountered the handler moving, speaking, and carrying familiar scents. The test removed most of those clues and left the face alone. Recognition still remained above chance. Faces can also reveal how another sheep feels. Ears drawn back or held unevenly may accompany discomfort. Tightening around the eyes and changes in the muzzle can appear during pain or stress. Researchers and farmers use combinations of these signs in sheep facial expression scales. A single ear movement proves very little by itself. Several changes appearing together, along with posture and behaviour, provide a more reliable guide. Memory gives these expressions lasting importance. A calm handling experience can make later contact easier. Rough restraint or repeated fear may cause stronger avoidance when the same place or person appears again. Sheep can learn routes through a handling system, remember where food was found, and adjust when a rewarded choice changes. Their social world is built from this stored information. The flock now resolves into known companions, rivals, offspring, and human caretakers. Each face predicts a slightly different history of safety, access, or conflict. That ability becomes urgent at the very beginning of life, when a ewe must learn the scent, voice, and appearance of one newborn lamb, among many births occurring within the same flock. Within moments of birth, the ewe turns toward the lamb lying beside her. Its coat is wet with fluid, and a thin membrane may still cover part of the face. The ewe begins licking firmly across the head and body. This helps clear the nose and mouth, dries the coat, and encourages the newborn to move. The contact also begins a rapid process of recognition. Fluid around the lamb carries a distinct mixture of scents. As the ewe licks, she learns the odor of her own offspring. Smell becomes especially important when several ewes give birth close together and young lambs begin moving through the same area. The ewe's maternal behavior is supported by major hormonal changes around birth. Estrogen rises before labor and prepares the brain to respond to the newborn. Oxytocin is released during contractions and when the lamb begins suckling. This hormone helps the uterus contract, supports the release of milk, and strengthens maternal responses. Prolactin helps prepare the udder and maintain milk production. Together, these chemical changes make the ewe unusually attentive during the hours surrounding birth. Close contact during the first half hour is especially important. A ewe can begin forming a selective bond within approximately 30 minutes. Once that bond develops, she commonly allows her own lamb to approach the udder while turning away, nudging, or blocking an unfamiliar lamb. This selectivity protects a limited supply of milk. Producing milk requires water, energy, protein, and minerals from the ew's body. Directing that investment toward her own offspring improves the chance that her genes continue into the following generation. Interrupting the first contact can make recognition harder. If the lamb is removed too soon, covered with unfamiliar smells, or mixed among several newborns before the ewe has learned it, rejection becomes more likely. Farmers sometimes use scent from birth fluids or close confinement to help a ewe accept a lamb that needs fostering. The newborn has urgent work of its own. Sheep are precocial animals, meaning their young are relatively developed and mobile soon after birth. A healthy lamb often begins lifting its head within minutes. It pushes against the ground with unsteady legs, falls, and tries again. Standing quickly matters because the lamb must reach the udder. Most healthy lambs begin nursing within about 30 minutes to 1 hour. The first milk is called colostrum. It is thicker and richer than ordinary milk. Colostrum provides concentrated energy that helps the lamb produce heat after leaving the warm body of the ewe. It also contains antibodies, protective proteins that pass from the mother and help defend the newborn against infection. A lamb is born with very little antibody protection in its bloodstream because the sheep placenta transfers few antibodies before birth. The intestine can absorb these large proteins most effectively during the first hours of life. That ability falls rapidly over the following day, making early feeding especially important. At very close range, the ewe confirms identity mainly through smell. She may sniff beneath the lamb's tail or along its coat before allowing it to nurse. As the pair begins moving farther apart, vision and sound become more useful. Sheep calls carry individual differences in pitch, rhythm, and the pattern of frequencies within the sound. Acoustic studies show that these details can help mothers and young distinguish familiar voices. A ewe often uses low, closed-mouth bleats while her lamb is nearby. The sound is quiet and suited to keeping contact without attracting attention across a large distance. A separated ewe may produce louder calls with the mouth open. The lamb answers with its own higher voice and begins searching. During the first days, both animals become increasingly accurate at identifying one another's calls. Sight joins the process as the lamb grows more mobile. Body size, face shape, coat markings, and movement all provide additional clues. Recognition becomes a layered system in which scent works best at close range, while voice and appearance remain useful across the flock. A large group of sheep may contain dozens of similar lambs weaving among adult legs. Within that movement, each ewe is listening for one voice and checking one familiar smell. The flock's social order begins with many bonds of this kind, each formed through minutes of contact and strengthened through feeding. After the lamb has nursed and the ewe has settled, the pair can rest among familiar animals. Their breathing slows, rumination begins around them, and the flock gradually enters the quieter states that make real sheep sleep possible. Within the settled flock, stillness can mean several different things. A sheep lying with its legs folded beneath the body may be awake and alert. its jaw may continue moving as it chews cud. The animal may also be drowsy, lightly asleep, or passing into a deeper stage that cannot be identified from posture alone. Researchers therefore measure several signals at the same time. Electroencephalography records tiny changes in electrical activity across the brain. The name is often shortened to EEG. Electromyography measures activity in muscles, especially around the neck. Eye movements, breathing, body position, and video recordings help complete the picture. Together, these signals allow scientists to separate wakefulness, rumination, non-rapid eye movement sleep, and rapid eye movement sleep. During non-rapid eye movement sleep, large groups of brain cells begin working in a slower and more synchronized pattern. The EEG trace develops broader waves. Short bursts called sleep spindles may also appear. A spindle lasts only a brief moment and looks like a compact cluster of faster waves rising from slower background activity. In one study, 6 sheep were recorded across 2 nights and 1 day. Their spindle frequencies broadly fell between 10 and 16 Hz. A hertz means 1 cycle per second. This range overlaps with the classical spindle frequencies measured in sleeping humans. The similarity does not make sheep sleep identical to human sleep, though it shows that some basic patterns are shared across mammal brains. Rapid eye movement sleep has a different combination of signs. Brain activity becomes more similar to wakefulness. The eyes move beneath closed lids, while muscle tone drops sharply, because the body becomes less prepared to hold itself upright. Clear rapid eye movement sleep usually occurs when a sheep is lying securely. A standing animal must keep enough muscle activity to balance and support its weight. This reduced muscle tone is one reason rapid eye movement sleep can be harder to obtain in an animal that feels exposed. A quiet location and nearby companions may allow deeper sleep to appear. Predator pressure helps shape this pattern. A wild grazing animal benefits from sleeping in shorter periods and returning to alertness quickly. The flock adds protection by placing many ears and eyes nearby. Even so, individual sheep still divide much of the day among feeding, cud chewing, movement, and brief rest. Rumination makes their sleep especially unusual. A sheep can lie quietly with its eyes partly closed while chewing a return mouthful of plant material. Older observations and modern brain recordings suggest that some rumination overlaps with lighter, non-rapid eye movement sleep. The jaw continues its steady cycle, while parts of the brain show slower sleep-related activity. A sheep may therefore carry out digestion and light sleep at the same time. Clear, rapid eye movement sleep requires a more complete reduction in muscle tone and does not combine with active cud chewing in the same way. Sleep also responds to previous wakefulness. When sheep are kept awake, pressure for sleep builds. Scientists call this sleep homeostasis. Homeostasis means keeping an internal condition within a useful range. After sleep loss, sheep show stronger signs of recovery sleep, including changes in slow brain activity. The nervous system appears to track how much rest has been missed and adjusts later sleep accordingly. Sheep have become useful research animals partly because their brains are relatively large and folded. The surface contains ridges and grooves more like those of a human brain than the smoother brain of a mouse. Wireless recording equipment can monitor sheep while they stand, walk, feed, and rest with fewer restrictions from cables. Researchers use them to study sleep, brain development, epilepsy, and inherited neurological diseases. Their role in science became widely known through Dolly. Born in Scotland in 1996, Dolly was the first mammal cloned from an adult somatic cell. A somatic cell is an ordinary body cell, rather than a sperm or egg. Her birth showed that genetic instructions inside a mature cell could be returned to an earlier state and used to develop an entire animal. The sheep associated with bedtime, therefore, has its own complex sleep biology and a long place in brain research. Its nights are divided by digestion, social safety, posture, and the need to remain ready for danger. Humans gave sheep an entirely different sleeping role, placing an endless flock behind a fence and asking each animal to cross one at a time. The image of sheep crossing a fence feels old enough to have no beginning. A common explanation gives the idea to shepherds who stayed awake counting their animals at night. That story fits the subject neatly, though no surviving record identifies a particular shepherd, country, or moment when the bedtime practice began. Its history appears instead through stories and written references that gradually move closer to the version used today. Medieval storytellers sometimes used a device known as an endless tale. A character might need to move a large number of animals across a river, bridge, gate, or narrow opening. The storyteller would describe them passing one at a time, then delay the rest of the story until the entire group had crossed. Because the number could be enormous, the repeated action might continue as long as necessary. Sheep suited this pattern especially well. A flock contains many similar animals that move together and can be pictured entering a narrow space in a steady line. Each crossing is slightly different, though the basic action remains predictable. One animal approaches, clears the obstacle, and makes room for another. A clear 19th century example appears in the work of the British writer Harriet Martineau. She published a collection called Illustrations of Political Economy between 1832 and 1834. In one passage, a worried landowner recalls sheep following one another through a break in a fence. The imagined sequence becomes so repetitive that sleep arrives before the flock has finished passing. The Oxford English Dictionary records a related example from 1854, in which imaginary sheep are used to encourage sleep. Later references during the 19th century make the connection increasingly direct. By the 20th century, counting sheep had become familiar enough to appear in cartoons, books, films, and ordinary conversation. The proposed effect depends on attention. A person lying awake may return repeatedly to unfinished work, an awkward memory, or a concern about the following day. A simple mental task can occupy part of that attention. Counting gives the sequence an order, while the repeated image provides something neutral to follow. Success depends on how the task feels. Bare counting may become dull enough that the original worries return. A person who becomes concerned about reaching a high number may also turn the exercise into a test. That effort can increase alertness instead of reducing it. A richer image gives attention more material without demanding difficult decisions. The fence may have rough wooden rails. Each sheep can approach at a different pace. Hooves touch the ground on the far side, and the animal moves quietly toward the waiting flock. These details can hold attention more effectively than numbers alone. A study published in 2002 is often described as proof that counting sheep does not work. The actual experiment tested a broader idea. Researchers Alison Harvey and Susanna Payne worked with 41 people who experienced insomnia. One group learned to create an interesting and pleasant mental scene. Participants might picture a waterfall, a holiday setting, or another calm place containing enough detail to hold their attention. A second group used general distraction methods, while a third received no special instruction. The engaging imagery group reported fewer unwanted thoughts before sleep, and a greater reduction in the time they believed it took them to fall asleep. The study did not include a separate group instructed specifically to count sheep. One of the researchers later clarified that the experiment was never designed as a direct sheep counting test. Its result concerned the difference between vivid, absorbing imagery and weaker forms of distraction. Counting sheep may therefore help when the scene remains calm and detailed enough to interrupt worry. It may offer little benefit when the animals become empty numbers moving through a picture that no longer holds attention. The ritual has survived because sheep fit the task unusually well. Their flocking movement is orderly. Their rounded fleece suggests softness and warmth. One similar animal can follow another without changing the scene sharply or creating suspense. The sheep crossing the fence now carries more than a number. Inside its body, microbes are still turning grass into energy. Its face can be recognized by familiar companions. The pale fleece is growing from millions of follicles shaped by thousands of years of breeding. Each quiet crossing joins mountain ancestry, human history, and the material that eventually became the blanket lying across the bed. That blanket still belongs to a much larger living system. More than 1 billion domestic sheep remain across the world, although the exact total changes from year to year. In some regions, sheep are raised mainly for meat. Elsewhere, milk becomes cheese, yogurt, or other foods that can be stored longer than fresh milk. Wool remains important in parts of Australia, New Zealand, China, the United Kingdom, South Africa, and many other countries. Small flocks also support families in dry grasslands, mountain valleys, and places where cattle would require more food or water. The animal still performs several jobs at once. It can produce lambs and manure during its lifetime, while certain breeds also supply milk or an annual fleece. Managed grazing is used to control vegetation beneath solar panels, between rows of vines, and in some habitats where open ground must be maintained. Sheep also continue to serve in medical and biological research because their body size, lifespan, social behavior, and folded brains allow studies that cannot always be performed in smaller animals. Wool has traveled far beyond the sweater. Its crimp and trapped air make it useful in blankets and mattress fillings. The fiber's recovery after compression helps carpets and upholstery keep their shape. Panels containing wool can absorb sound inside offices, studios, and public buildings because the tangled fibers turn some sound energy into tiny movements and heat. Loose or bonded wool can insulate walls and roofs. Protective uniforms benefit from the fiber's resistance to flame and its tendency to char instead of melting. Felt appears in filters, musical instruments, machinery, crafts, and polishing materials. Fine merino wool is used in performance clothing because it can absorb water vapor and reduce the clammy feeling that develops when moisture collects beside the skin. These uses begin with real advantages, though the complete production system still carries costs. A fleece can regrow after shearing, and untreated wool can break down through biological processes under suitable conditions. Raising the sheep also requires land, water, fencing, transport, and care. Rumen microbes release methane while digesting grass. Scouring uses water and energy to remove grease and dirt. Poorly timed grazing can damage vegetation or soil, while good management may help maintain some open habitats. The useful question is therefore how the whole chain operates, from pasture and animal welfare to processing, transport, product life, and eventual disposal. Future sheep farming will depend partly on keeping enough genetic variety within the species. A breed adapted to cool, wet country may struggle during repeated heat waves. Local sheep that produce less wool may carry valuable resistance to parasites or survive on sparse forage. Genes linked with heat tolerance, disease response, or efficient digestion may become increasingly useful as rainfall patterns shift and new illnesses spread. Preserving many breeds keeps more of those inherited options available. Technology is also changing the way a flock is observed. Electronic ear tags can give each sheep a permanent identity within a digital record. Automated scales can weigh an animal as it walks through a narrow race. Activity monitors may reveal changes in movement, feeding, or rest before illness becomes obvious. Thermal cameras can detect unusual heat around an inflamed area. Facial recognition systems are being tested to identify individual sheep from the shape and markings of the face. Virtual fencing uses sound cues and location tracking to influence where animals graze without placing a physical fence along every boundary. These tools extend an ancient task. A shepherd has always needed to know which ewe was missing, which lamb belonged to her, and which animal was moving differently from the rest. Sensors simply make some of those observations measurable across a larger flock. The relationship continues to move in both directions. Human demand changes breeding, shearing, and grazing practices. Sheep biology sets the limits of fiber growth, digestion, reproduction, and heat tolerance. The land then determines how many animals can be supported without exhausting the plants beneath them. The sheep crossing the imagined fence now carries this entire history in its body. Its split hooves come from ancestors that moved across broken ground. Inside the rumen, microbes continue releasing energy from grass. The face can be remembered by flock companions for years. Millions of follicles build keratin fibers from nutrients carried in blood. Each fiber bends because its inner regions grow unevenly, creating the crimp that holds still air inside a blanket. A mouflon-like seasonal coat became denser through repeated selection. Managed flocks supplied recurring fiber. Shearing released the retained fleece, which was washed, aligned, twisted, and woven. The finished material eventually reached beds where an image of the animal itself became a tool for quieting human thought. One sheep clears the low fence and steps onto the grass beyond it. Another follows at a steady distance. Their pale coats move gently above strong legs designed for rough ground. The flock gathers close enough to feel secure, then settles into the familiar arrangement of resting bodies. Some animals continue chewing cud. Others pass into lighter sleep, followed by brief, deeper stages when the surroundings remain calm. The line across the fence grows quieter, while the real flock rests together under the coat that humans and sheep shaped across thousands of years.